welcome back to Exploring the World with the Jaw Potato Sisters.
When we were reaching out to people for the Savannah season, we came across a carnivorous plant specialist.
His name is Zack, and he works at the California Academy of Sciences.
And it's really cool for those of you who've been there, and I know you know what I'm talking about.
Their planetarium and roof gardens is amazing.
And we're no experts on carnivorous plants, but since our last episodes have just been interview after interview, we thought we would actually give some information today.
Say hi to Zack!
My name is Zach Leibovich, and here at the California Academy of Sciences, I am the landscape coordinator. So I work with our landscape manager, Nicole, to take care of our entire 7-acre grounds. That's our famous wildlife corridor living roof, as well as our outdoor gardens. And I got into horticulture at a very young age. My grandparents were really the ones who fostered my love and appreciation for plants. So at around 4 years old is when I started growing carnivorous plants, and I started growing orchids at the same time. I have a really it's a pretty vivid memory from when I was really little in preschool about my preschool teacher reading us a book about carnivorous plants, and I remember running home and having my parents order them online for me. I tried growing Venus flytraps, and of course I killed them. And it took many years after that, but by the time I was in middle school, I had a really large collection of carnivorous plants and orchids and other rare and exotic plants at my house. And ever since then, I have been studying and taking care of plants professionally.
Wow. Information time now.
Yes. Carnivorous plants actually evolved around 120 million years ago, but some sources say 2 to 4 million years ago. So
we don't really know what the timeline is, because go to different people and they'll tell you different times. That's why we're using a broad timeline.
Yes. Scientists never agree on things. There are barely any fossils of these carnivorous plants, which is why it took so long for the scientists to find out how they evolved.
And when they evolved. If anybody listening is a scientist and are wondering, well, the animal genes may have passed to the plant, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they didn't. Instead, as Mr.Zack will share, they shared a similar chemical inside their body alongside insects that allowed them over time to use that to trap insects. Actually, since insects are the most common prey for these plants, they are sometimes also called insectivorous plants.
So, of the most popular places to see carnivorous plants is the Big Thicket Natural Reserve in Texas. It's also known for their carnivorous plants, and they're the host of 4 out of the 5 types of carnivorous plants. They host pitcher plants, sundews, bladderworts, and butterworts. If you're wondering where the all-time famous Venus flytrap is, it is actually found in South Carolina.
If you're wondering, South Carolina, I know. Venus flytraps look like tropical plants, but they aren't.
And sorry to those of you who thought carnivorous plants eat humans. They don't. And we can thank Darwin for conducting that research, proving to the rest of the world that carnivorous plants were not a man-eating mythological plant. Basically, most carnivorous plants grew and still grow in some of the worst.
No, Isha, you don't see the worst in science. We say the least nutrient-rich habitats in the world.
Yeah. You and your fancy terms. Anyway, these soils lack hydrogen.
It's nitrogen, Isha.
Stop interrupting me. Anyway, it also lacked phosphorus. And so the protein-rich insects that landed on them could last them for a while.
That's right. A nice insect will last a Venus flytrap for 3 whole weeks.
Carnivorous plants are quite abundant, being found in around 9 plant families and around 600 types of plants.
And they all use different types of traps. So not all of them just snap shut like the Venus flytrap. For example, pitcher plants use a type of trap called a pitfall trap, which is what it sounds like. The fly will fall into one of their pit-like leaves and die there.
That sounded so creepy.
Meh.
So we did our research about carnivorous plants a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
we read that they've been around for around 70 million years, and they evolved because of a genetic anomaly which allowed some plants to become carnivorous.
Yeah.
What was this genetic anomaly and how did it happen?
Yeah, well, that's interesting you mentioned that. So, carnivorous plants, the first thing you have to know is they're relatively new evolutionarily. Carnivorous plants, those movies you see about Jurassic Park and dinosaurs with giant Venus flytraps eating things, that's not really where carnivorous plants would be. Carnivorous plants evolved relatively recently in the term of evolution. And the thing with carnivorous plants is they didn't just evolve one time. Carnivorous plants have evolved many times across the world. Right now, the last time I checked on International Carnivorous Plant Society, I think there's around 900 species, but I would double check that. But many carnivorous plants evolved separately. So things like the Venus flytrap and the sundew evolved very differently from the North American pitcher plant. But the cool thing about evolution within carnivorous plants is different genetic changes have led to the same phenotypes within traits. So carnivorous plants do three things. They attract insects, whether that be through colorful colors or enticing smells. So they bring insects in like flowers. They trap insects through many different mechanisms, which I'm sure we'll be able to talk about today. And then they have to digest them. And that's really what sets carnivorous plants apart from other plants. One of the theories, and this is the theory that I agree with the most of how carnivorous plants started to evolve, was through a change in an enzyme that plants make called chitinase. And what you have to know about chitin, it's a carbohydrate, and it is found in a lot of things, but one of the things it's found in is fungi. It's also found in insects, which is really neat. It makes up their exoskeletons. But chitin is really important in terms of carnivorous plants because if you think about plants, they can be attacked by fungus on their leaves. So plants were making chitinase to ward off fungal pathogens that were causing damage to their bodies. And the theory that the plants that were already making chitinase were able to break down insects that got stuck on them by coincidence is one of the leading theories of how this trait or carnivorous plants started to evolve. And what's neat about thinking what's neat about thinking about carnivorous plants that way is how coincidentally plants that were already sticky or trying to ward off insects by having hair on them were able to capture insects, but they weren't able to digest them. And the ones that were making chitinase had this advantage. And there are plenty of plants that are still sticky that capture insects. Things that you might even see in your own garden, like tomato plants, are often covered in bugs, but they can't digest them, so that doesn't make them carnivorous. But having the ability to take nutrients out of organisms that would be attacking you gives these plants a strong advantage in habitats where nutrients are not found in the soil.
That's so interesting. So just by coincidence that chitin was found in those specific plants and also insects, or was that also like evolved through plants generally?
What I do know is it's found in the animal kingdom in insects, and it's also found in the kingdom of fungi, making up their bodies. But a lot of times, what I've learned about evolution, a lot of things are coincidental that give advantages. If we're talking about something else, maybe a red flower has an advantage over a white flower for attracting a certain pollinator, and that by coincidence, you're getting many more pollinators, and that red flower becomes more prominent because that plant is able to reproduce better. But a lot of these things are, everything has to line up right, and we have millions and millions and millions of years for these things to happen. So it's very interesting.
Can you tell us more about the plants you grow in California Academy of Sciences?
Yeah, so the California Academy of Sciences, currently we don't have any carnivorous plants on the property, but I would love to have some because there are many California native carnivorous plants, which I'd be happy to tell you more about if you'd like. But here at the Academy, we have an initiative called Thriving California, where our goal is to revitalize natural spaces with plants that should have been here. So but the climate we live in, and we're talking climate, we live in a Mediterranean climate. A Mediterranean, yeah. So you might be thinking, we live in California. Why are we talking about the Mediterranean? Isn't that like France and Italy and Morocco? No. There's lots of climates on the planet, like, temperate deciduous forests, or temperate. We have tundra, we have tropical rainforests, subtropics. But here in California, by the coast, we have a Mediterranean climate. And these climates are incredibly important, even though most people who live in California don't know we live in one, because Mediterranean climates only make up 2% of the land area of the planet. 2% of the land. So that's not even including the ocean, just 2% of the land. But they contain about 20% of plant species that exist. Isn't that insane? 20% of plant species. Yeah. So that's areas that are smaller than our rainforests that are having so much diversity in them. And so here at the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, we're a special type of Mediterranean climate because we're out on this peninsula that sticks out into the ocean and has the bay on the other side. So not only, let me take a backtrack. A Mediterranean type climate is characterized by long, dry summers and mild, wet winters. It really rarely freezes, and it's not like a desert where you're going without rain for really, really, really extended periods of time. In theory, it should rain through the winter in a Mediterranean climate. So these conditions allow life to proliferate because there's never really a season where things can't be alive, aside from the limiting factor of water. But there's always that mild winter where things can come back to life. And I'm sure since you guys live in the Bay Area, you see the hills come back to life in the winter, right? They turn green.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So people say there's no seasons here, the weather doesn't change. That's completely wrong. We get rain in the winter and we get a dry summer, and that's enough to foster a lot of life. And in addition, do you guys think we get any water in the summer? It doesn't rain, but what type of water do we get in the Bay Area?
Water?
No, it must be from the mist or the fog that
the fog.
The fog. And fog is so important in Mediterranean climates because plants have evolved to be able to take this fog out of the air and use it for water. So if you guys have ever gone for a hike on a foggy day and you've seen Monterey cypress, it's usually wet underneath them, but there's no sprinklers out in the woods. The fog is able to condense and form what's called fog drip to not only water the plants that are condensing the fog, but underneath them. You guys know about our redwood forests, right?
Yeah.
There's tons of plants and ferns and oxalis and orchids and lilies and all kinds of things that grow in there all through the year. And it never looks as really, it gets dry and dusty, but does it ever look as dry as our hills?
No.
Why do you think that is? What do you think the redwoods are able to do?
They're able to condense the fog.
Yeah, exactly. So every time it's foggy in there, it's dripping water down onto the plants. So that's really cool. But here at the Academy, we focus on planting things like that that are fostering wildlife here. So things like redwoods and the understory plants like western sword fern and redwood sorrel. And then we have our living roof, which is much more typical of a Mediterranean type grassland, where we have lots of fescue grass up there, and then plants that you would see interspersed with grass, like different wildflowers like evening primrose and yarrow. And we even have orchids up on the roof too, which is really interesting. But the thing to know about the Academy, and the thing to know about San Francisco, specifically the San Francisco Peninsula, is it is very, for lack of a better word, artificial. What was here before Spanish settlers came into the area, this was a sand dune ecosystem with minimal trees. It's really windy and it's cold and it's foggy, and trees don't thrive here. We had things like coast live oak that would grow here, but they'd be found in valleys that are a little bit warmer and a little bit protected from the wind. Other than that, we have things that are stabilizing the sand dunes. And now when you go into Golden Gate Park, you see these huge trees like Monterey cypress and eucalyptus. And these aren't really the typical plants that would be found on the San Francisco Peninsula going back thousands of years. So it's important to be planting California native plants in California, but the most important thing is to know what species are you targeting, what is, and we go back to what your mom said, microclimate. I'm sure you guys have been to the Academy and it's usually cold here, and then you go to Oakland in the afternoon and it's like 90 degrees. So we have lots of microclimates in the Bay Area, depending on the topography, the hills and valleys, how the wind is moving around them, and also how far we are from the ocean. We have this cold ocean and bay that keeps us cool in the summer and warmer in the winter. But the further away you get from that, water has a very high specific heat capacity, so it holds a lot of energy and it's able to stabilize our temperatures, which is really neat.
We wanted to start with one of the most popular carnivorous plants, the
Mhm.
Venus flytrap.
Yeah.
Flytrap shuts when an insect touches one of the many trigger hairs on its
Mhm.
leaves twice. Will
Yeah,
the
that's exactly
flytrap
right.
not feel the prey if it touches its hairs just once? And
Mhm.
also, how does it have such a fast metabolism?
Yeah, so Venus flytraps are really interesting. So you're exactly right. They have, if we're looking at a Venus flytrap, it kind of looks like that, right? And that part of the plant is the leaf. So on a Venus flytrap, before I even start talking, I'm going to talk about the parts so you understand what I'm talking about. This part right here that looks like the mouth, that is the leaf. And then this part here that looks like a leaf is the stem that connects it to the base of the plant, and that's called the petiole. It's not a stem, it's called a petiole. And so if we're talking about the leaf, each leaf has two lobes. So you have two sides to it, kind of like that. And there's these hairs on the outside that look like teeth. And then on the inside of each lobe, there's three trigger hairs, is what they're called. So you're correct. You do need to touch two of those hairs in order for the trap to shut. What's really cool about that too is you need to touch them within a time span of about 15 to 25 seconds. If you don't, if you touch one and then wait a couple minutes and touch another one, it won't shut. So the reason for this, these plants have evolved this in order to ensure that they're closing their trap on a living, moving insect. It takes, as I mentioned, carnivorous plants grow in really, really nutrient poor habitats, and it takes a lot of energy to move your leaves. So if you were a plant and you grew in a place that wasn't the best and you wanted food, you wanted some nutrients. I'm not going to say food, and I'll tell you why in a second. You wouldn't want to waste your time. So it's really important that number one, there's a moving insect in there. After that, the trap will snap shut if two of those hairs are touched within 15 seconds. And what's even cooler, the insect needs to keep crawling around in there and touching those trigger hairs in order for this digestion process to start. When it closes, the hairs kind of link together like this, and you can see there's like space in between my fingers, right? So if it's something like a small little ant or something that is really tiny, it'll be able to escape through those holes, like in between my fingers.
Yeah.
And nothing will be triggering those hairs, and the trap will open back up, and it'll wait for something bigger. But if it is something bigger, like a spider or a beetle or something that won't fit through those hairs, it'll keep touching the triggers and the trap to sealing shut like this. And it will seal completely, almost, and I'm going to call it a pseudo stomach, like pseudo meaning looks like, and stomach meaning stomach. And that's when the plant will start to release digestive enzymes, one of which is that chitinase I was talking about earlier. And that will break down the exoskeletons of the insects and make nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium all available to the plants much easier. After about a week, the plant will open back up and the parts it was unable to digest will be left on the leaf, and they get washed away by rain or they just sit there. And the reason these plants go through all this process to trap bugs, I was telling you it's very energy intensive, but the leaves can only do that about 3 times before they die. Not the plant, but just the individual leaf. So you'll notice, so if you have a Venus flytrap as a plant at home, you don't want to keep poking it to close the leaves because they'll die. Can you guys guess where Venus flytraps are from? This is one of my favorite things to tell people. Where does it look like they're from?
Probably from like a tropical climate.
Right? Wouldn't that make sense? They look like this crazy tropical plant. They're actually from North Carolina and a little part of South Carolina. There's a around 25, 30-mile radius where they go naturally in between North and South Carolina, right next to the coast in the sand. And it's not like the coast here in California where it's mild. It gets really hot in the summer. It gets, 90, 100 degrees, and it gets really cold in the winter. So these are temperate plants. They grow in a climate that gets snow. They grow in a climate that gets hot summers. They're really adapted to growing in pine barrens within the Carolinas, which is really neat. Everyone thinks they're tropical. There's plenty of tropical carnivorous plants, don't get me wrong, but it's really cool that they're from the most popular rainforest carnivorous plants that you see are called nepenthes. They're these tropical pitcher plants. Their leaves look like these vessels that hold water. And they're from Southeast Asia. There's, I think, 1 or 2 species that extend to India. And then there's 1 or 2 species in Madagascar, and they go as far as like New Zealand and the top of Australia. But those are the tropical ones people normally think of. And like I mentioned, carnivorous plants are incredibly diverse and they've evolved many times. So there's other things that grow in rainforests. Things like epiphytic bladderworts, those grow in South America. They also grow in cloud forests. And then there's things like sundews. But the carnivorous plants, in fact, the reason they're growing, so there's a couple, let me take a backtrack. Rainforests are really nutrient-rich habitats. A lot of the times there's lots of decaying matter on the forest floor, and there's lots of nutrients for things to use. So it wouldn't really make a lot of sense for carnivorous plants to grow in rainforests. And there's actually 3 species of sundews. Do you guys know what sundews are?
I've heard of them, but not really.
They're a carnivorous plant with really sticky leaves that catch insects. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They look like a
this,
giant stick.
And they have like these little sticky.
Yeah, and then fly lands, it starts curving.
Yeah, not all of them do that, but that's pretty much right. And sundews are incredibly diverse and found almost everywhere on the planet except for Antarctica. But sundews, there's a few species of sundews that grow in Australia in forests where it's shady and they grow near the forest floor, and they're actually de-evolving that carnivorous trait, scientists have thought. And they're called the Queensland sundews. Yeah, it's Drosera adelae. I think it's Drosera prolifera.
Going back to the Venus flytrap, if like a dead fly falls into the Venus flytrap and touches 2 of the trigger hairs, will the Venus flytrap still eat it, or will it just like throw it up?
It will shut, but it will open back up and it won't digest it. Because it needs to be touching those trigger hairs for about a day for that trap to go like this to make that little stomach and start releasing the enzymes. If the plant doesn't feel an insect in there, it knows it's wasting its time, and it will open back up and wait for another more nutritious thing to land on it. They're actually one of the least efficient carnivorous plants. Some of the more efficient ones are things like the sundews, where they don't discriminate the sticky ones, and then things like the pitcher plants are
Yeah.
incredibly efficient at catching bugs. And pitcher plants have evolved lots of different times. There's pitcher plants in Australia that have evolved separately from the pitcher plants in Southeast Asia, and then there's also pitcher plants in the Americas that have evolved. And in addition to that, there's things that are starting to turn into pitcher plants. There's 3 species of. Do you know what bromeliads are?
No.
They're these plants that are often. Do you know what an epiphyte is? If I say that, like they grow on other plants, like trees.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think yeah.
So bromeliads often, not all the time, are epiphytes, or they grow on rocks, which is called a lithophyte, and they store water. Their leaves are shaped like a vase, and they store water in the center of that vase, and that's called a bromeliad's tank, like a tank of water. And there's 3 species now of bromeliads that not only store water in their tank, but they attract insects using bright colors. They trap them in that tank, and they also make the enzymes to digest them, which makes them officially carnivorous. Carnivorous plants are not eating insects in the way that people are eating food. Carnivorous plants are eating sugar that they make from photosynthesis. They're still plants. Most plants are photosynthetic. I'd say most because there are instances of like parasitic plants that don't make chlorophyll. But Venus flytraps, all carnivorous plants are photosynthetic. They take sunlight and carbon dioxide and water, and they turn it into sugar. But the thing that they're missing is nutrients, nutrients, other macronutrients. So things like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium are the main ones that they're lacking. They're in these habitats that are either really wet and they've all washed away, or they are lacking oxygen in the soil, so decomposition can't really happen. And substances called peat, which is plant matter that is stuck in a state where it doesn't really decompose over time because there's no oxygen underneath in these waterlogged areas, or areas on cliffs where water's washing away all the nutrients. So places where nutrients can't build up, and that's why they've evolved this strategy. So I'm sure you guys have taken a vitamin before, right?
Yeah.
If you miss your vitamin, what happens? You don't die, right? So these bugs are more so like vitamins for the carnivorous plants. They still are sitting out in the sun, and they actually need a lot of sunlight. Like I was saying, most carnivorous plants grow in areas where there's lots and lots of sun to make the energy to be able to digest things. So they're not eating like we're eating. They're eating like vitamins, and that's what the insects are doing. And not often, but some carnivorous plants eat things that aren't insects, which is kind of cool.
Do any carnivorous plants make types of waste?
Generally, no. Once the leaves have filled up or are used up, they often just die, and that's what the waste is. I'm sure you have houseplants or have seen plants where the leaves drop off, and it's not as common in the Bay Area, but like, in the fall, leaves fall off of trees. But that's what happens. They don't have an excretory system like an animal would. Just the insects, and then their absorptive glands are what they're able to take in those broken down nutrients through. So that's kind of the analogy. It's like in our small intestines we have like villi that we take in the nutrients through, and there's glands that we can absorb through. But the carnivorous plants have both I guess we kind of have both in the same place, but they have both glands on their leaves in the same place. And if you look really close at a carnivorous plant's leaf, you can actually see these glands. They're visible to the naked eye. I mean, it's really great if you can get a magnifying glass or a microscope, but they're big enough for you to see. And they look like little dots. And there's even some pitcher plants that are so glandular, they're named things like Nepenthes glandulifera.
Wow.
But if you look at a sundew leaf, a sundew has its glands. It has glands at the tips of its hairs to make mucilage, and it also has glands underneath its hairs to absorb things. So that's an example of where they're separated. Like we have excretory glands and then absorptive glands. If you look at a Venus flytrap leaf up close, if you're using a very high microscope, and this is really not that powerful, it just has improved our vision of things. You can see them with your naked eye. All these little dots are little glands, which is really cool. And that kind of makes up what makes the leaf red. If you look at a Venus flytrap leaf, it's not just like red. It has little dots like pointillism that all come together and make it red.
When you mentioned the Venus flytrap and the chlorophyll is green.
Yeah.
So when trees, when they change color, how do they make food?
When they change color, well, when trees are changing color, they're generally stopping making food and preparing for a season where they won't be. So whether it's something like in a temperate climate where trees are losing their leaves in the winter, they're removing that chlorophyll from those leaves and they're exposing pigments like anthocyanins and carotenoids that have different colors like red and yellow. So they're getting ready for a season where they know it's not going to be really productive. But so they're not making food once they are changing those colors. What was the other part of your question? I'm sorry, or was that it?
So how do these plants pollinate and spread their seeds? Is it with the wind?
That's a great question. And there's lots of different ways that they are spreading their seed. But I'll first start. We're going to take a little backtrack. Carnivorous plants eat bugs. And what's generally pollinating flowers? Bugs. Right? Yeah. So you have this problem now. You are attracting bugs to eat them, but and I mentioned to you, all carnivorous plants are flowering plants. They're really new on the evolutionary scale. They all make flowers, so they need to be pollinated by, well, not all flowering plants need to be pollinated by animals like grass, but another topic. I digress. Carnivorous plants all need something to pollinate them, but they don't want to get eaten. So the way that carnivorous plants get around this, the first thing that they do is they usually make their flowers really far away. So if the plant's down here, they have a stem that's really, really long to make the flowers in a different spot. And things like Venus flytraps do that. Some carnivorous plants have a different pollinator than what they eat. Things like butterworts, which are really, really sticky. Some butterworts are pollinated by hummingbirds, but they eat gnats, which is really cool. Lots of carnivorous plants are pollinated by bees. Things like the North American pitcher plants and the California pitcher plant are pollinated by bees. And a lot of times they'll either make their flowers before the pitchers come up so that the bees are able to pollinate the flowers and then get eaten later. That's another way that they can do it. But there's lots of really, really unique strategies that they use. But the main ones are timing, separation of the flowers and the leaves, and then having a different pollinator than what you're eating. And there's lots of amazing examples of this.
So, I mean, say like what you're eating, like the flies, why would they want to go to the Venus flytrap when they could just go to the flower?
Because they don't know. A lot of these, I hate to say bugs are stupid, but they're, the carnivorous plants are trying to make their leaves look like flowers. That's how they're attracting bugs. That's why they're so pretty. That's why people love them so much. But by making leaves that look like flowers, you're automatically going to be attracting a lot of insects.
So me and Isha watch a lot of documentaries about how animals that camouflage have to know how their prey sees them. So we were wondering, does this work with carnivorous plants? Do they need to know how their prey sees them to like get prey?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to know what you're looking for in a plant. So this is really cool. Carnivorous plants, well, plants in general are generally catering towards insects, sometimes birds, sometimes other pollinators like bats, but generally insects, right? And insects are seeing ultraviolet light, so there's hidden things on flowers we can't see. Have you guys seen pictures of flowers under ultraviolet light before?
Yes. Yeah.
But they're carnivorous plants that do this too. So if you look at the Helianthera from South America, UV light, they actually fluoresce under UV light. So an insect can be attracted.
Wow.
You know, if you're in the daylight, it just looks like that. But under UV light, the inside of the picture is like that. So they need to know what the insects are seeing. And it's not just exactly that they're knowing this. These things are happening by coincidence, and then it gives them an advantage. And that's how these things evolve.
Thanks, Zach.
Another thing that we didn't mention about carnivorous plants is that they're even sold in the black market.
If you're wondering the same thing as me when I heard that a black market sold plants, then yeah, I know. Apparently, this trade has had a pretty bad impact on carnivorous plants.
We were doing some research about you and the past work you were doing.
Mhm.
Apparently, you worked with some scientists that were aiming to rescue some of the plants that are illegally on the black market. Can you tell us more about this? Because before researching, we didn't even know that plants in the black market existed. How does this impact the plants being sold? What is the benefit of having carnivorous plants at home and in the wild?
Before this, I was working at a botanic garden in Washington, D.C. And we had a collection of plants called CITES. And CITES, CITES, stands for the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. So that's it. It's this set of regulations that were created to prevent people from transferring endangered species between different countries, and it was really made for animals, but it now applies to plants as well. And there's all kinds of problems with it, but it does a lot of good things. And when endangered species on the CITES list are stopped at a border of a country, they're sent to a botanic garden that is registered with CITES to take care of these plants. Oftentimes they've traveled too far or are in too bad of condition to be sent back to the country they're coming from. And a lot of times they don't know exactly where they're from, so it really wouldn't be worth sending them back. But I worked with primarily the CITES Paphiopedilum, which are slipper orchids of Asia. I worked with the CITES orchid collection at the botanic garden, and I took care of about 700 slipper orchids, but
Wow.
about 200 something of them were CITES. So that's a lot of plants. And these plants, some of them had been at the garden since 1980 something. So they're, they've been there for a while. But I also worked with the CITES pitcher plant collections. And there's a few species of North American pitcher plants that are really protected by CITES as well. But the reason this happens is a lot of the reason, aside from like urbanization and habitat destruction, why things become endangered is people are really drawn to them. So things like carnivorous plants and orchids that look really cool, people want them in their house, so they take them. Or they take them and they sell them because they know they can make a lot of money because people want to buy them. So unfortunately, they get harvested from the wild quite a lot. But botanic gardens around the world are doing work to conserve the plants that have been taken from the wild, grow them back into maturity, and have genetic databases, living genetic collections of things that would be found in the wild in case that they do go extinct one day. But on another note, even though I just said it's really bad to take carnivorous plants from the wild, and you shouldn't, nobody should, there are ways to get carnivorous plants sustainably, especially in the Bay Area. We have one of the largest carnivorous plant societies in the world, BACPS, Bay Area Carnivorous Plant Society, and there's lots of nurseries in the area that grow carnivorous plants because they grow really well here in the Bay Area. And you can buy sustainably from one of these nurseries or from a carnivorous plant show or sale, and you can have carnivorous plants in the house, and they make wonderful additions to any plant collection. I'm not going to lie. They don't do the best at controlling bugs in your house because they attract bugs. That's part of why they exist. They need to attract the bugs to eat them. They don't just catch them. But there are plants like butterworts that actually do really good jobs at butterworts are an exception. They do a really good job at catching all the fruit flies in your house. And the Mexican butterworts specifically are really, really wonderful for growing indoors. And there's even butterworts native to California as well. But the Mexican ones do best in the house. And aside from catching bugs, they're just beautiful. They're gorgeous plants to have around. And once you get, I'm not gonna lie, usually people, it takes them a few tries to grow them well, but they're really easy to take care of once you know what they want. And it's really rewarding to have something so beautiful in the space where you live.
The last question, which you kind of answered in this one, was why should we conserve
carnivorous?
Well, and I just say this flat out, we should conserve carnivorous plants because they're awesome. But no, we should conserve carnivorous plants because number one, they're beautiful examples of evolution. They are incredibly unique and often they're found in very specific places.
Yeah.
Because of that, they're often indicator species. If a habitat is rich in things like carnivorous plants, it's probably not very disturbed, that people haven't, and I hate to use this word, but ruined it yet. So if a place has lots of carnivorous plants growing in it, it's probably a very, very well preserved area. I guess I would like to say they're overlooked, but people really like carnivorous plants. And in my opinion, lots of the showy ones are the ones that are the most popular, but there's so many tiny little carnivorous plants that are overlooked, and some of those are the most important ones. So those are the things that really need to be preserved the most. They're unique. They're found in these crazy habitats, and they're indicator species. There's just not a reason why these plants shouldn't have conservation.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
doing this interview with us, Mr. Zack.
Of course.
Bye. We would like to thank Zach and the California Academy of Sciences for helping us out with this interview and episode. Some of the sources that were used for the script were the Botanical Society of America, Britannica, and of course the California Academy of Sciences. Thank you.